Ambassador Jack Harrison stood at the podium, eyes sweeping over the assembly in the grand hall of Enterprime. The sterile, artificial lighting made the cavernous room feel cold, as though the weight of intergalactic diplomacy could suffocate anyone caught in its grip. Around him, representatives from the galaxy's most powerful factions, human and alien alike, exchanged stiff greetings, their smiles as practiced as the handshakes that accompanied them. Jack wasn't fooled. He knew the game better than anyone in the room. His reputation as a strategist, earned 3 years of military service before his transition into diplomacy, preceded him. Now, standing as humanity's representative, he was playing a much higher stakes game. And yet, something about the atmosphere felt off. There was a subtle shift in the air, something that made his instincts prickle with unease. The Galactic Empire, that long-standing colossus of tyranny and control, had agreed to the peace talks only after the last war had nearly wiped out both sides. The terms had been clear: a ceasefire, a truce, and a path to stability. The human confederation had been wary, but Jack had pushed for it. Humanity needed the breathing room. Now, he wasn't so sure. A slight disturbance at the back of the room caught his attention. His aide, Captain Fay, moved toward him with urgency in her step. She leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, the Empire's fleet, it's moving." Jack's gaze hardened, his posture stiffening. "How reliable is the intel?" "Very. We've confirmed it. Ships are mobilizing at the edge of the system. They're heading to the neutral zone, sir." "It doesn't make sense." Jack exhaled slowly, his mind working furiously. The Empire had always operated under layers of subterfuge, but this? It was brazen. He had anticipated maneuvering, political games, even a few threats, but a breach of the truce? That was unthinkable. Or so he thought. He nodded at Fay, his expression calm, though his mind raced. "Get me a secure channel. I need to speak with command immediately." As Fay moved to relay his orders, Jack returned his focus to the summit. The delegates were still engaged in small talk, exchanging pleasantries, unaware of the brewing storm just outside. His attention landed on the figure at the head of the Empire's delegation, Grand Admiral Zareth Kor, tall, with a commanding presence that made the air itself seem to tremble. Zareth's cold, calculating eyes were locked on Jack as if challenging him to make the first move. Jack's lip curled into a brief, tight smile before he turned his back and walked toward a secluded corridor. The Empire's game had just begun. In the privacy of his quarters, Jack sat down at a desk, activating the secure communication line. His fingers hovered over the console, his mind grappling with the implications. Was it possible the Empire was already preparing for war again? The truce had been shaky from the start, but this sudden aggression felt like an open declaration. A moment later, Fay's voice crackled over the line. "We've got confirmation, sir. The fleet's been redeployed. They're moving fast, and they've taken a different route than usual. They're not heading to the core systems, they're going straight to the neutral zones. This is unprecedented." "Unprecedented doesn't begin to describe it," Jack muttered, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Have you alerted the Confederation leadership?" "Yes, sir. But you need to act. This isn't just a tactical shift, something else is going on here." Jack's mind was racing. "I'll need to confront Zareth directly. I'm heading to the assembly." The large hall was abuzz with conversations as Jack returned, though the energy had shifted. The casual air had evaporated, replaced by an undercurrent of suspicion. As Jack made his way to the front, the chatter fell silent. All eyes were on him, and for a moment, he felt the weight of the galaxy on his shoulders. Zareth stood at the head of the Empire's delegation, his cold, black eyes fixed on Jack as if daring him to speak. "Ambassador Harrison," Zareth greeted with a voice as smooth as polished obsidian. "It is a pleasure to see you again." "Pleasure is a word I reserve for more honest conversations, Grand Admiral." Jack's tone was sharp but measured. Zareth's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We are all here for the same reason, after all, peace, are we not?" Jack's gaze didn't falter. "That's why we're here. But peace requires trust, something that, frankly, I'm beginning to question in this room. Zareth raised an eyebrow, the smallest hint of amusement flickering in his gaze. Trust is earned, Ambassador. And I assure you, the Empire has no intention of breaching the terms of our agreement. Then why is your fleet mobilizing in direct defiance of the truce? Jack's words hit like a slap, echoing across the room. The other delegates watched in silence, waiting for the Empire's representative to respond. For a moment, the tension in the air was thick, so palpable it almost crackled. Zareth's eyes darkened, his smile vanishing. You have no evidence of such claims. You speak as if you already know the answer? Perhaps you should focus on your own people, Ambassador. Perhaps they, too, are preparing for something. Jack held his ground. Don't insult my intelligence, Zareth. I know exactly what your fleet is up to. Zareth's lips curled slightly, the tension in the air so dense it felt like the whole room was holding its breath. Then you should prepare for the consequences of your accusations. Before Jack could respond, Faye's voice came through his communicator, sharp and urgent. Sir, the transmission you requested, it's here. Jack didn't miss a beat. Excuse me, Admiral. It seems I've been proven right. The Imperial leader's gaze flicked toward Jack as he turned and exited the room swiftly, his mind already focused on the next steps. As Jack entered the security office, Faye handed him a data pad. His eyes scanned the transmission, detailed coordinates, troop movements, and fleet positions. The evidence was undeniable. Zareth had lied, and now Jack had the proof. But the stakes were higher than just a diplomatic victory. The galaxy's fragile peace was unraveling, and it would be Jack's job to hold it together. He knew the next steps would be delicate, but there was no turning back now. As he glanced over the data, Jack's resolve hardened. Humanity's future depended on him, and he would do whatever it took to keep them from plunging into another war. The dim lights of the secure communications room cast a cold glow on the sleek, metallic surfaces. Jack sat at the console, his fingers dancing across the controls with practiced precision. A low hum filled the air as the encrypted transmission came through. The voice on the other end was clear, but its urgency couldn't be disguised. Ambassador Harrison, the voice said, a mix of fear and disbelief evident. We've intercepted a fleet communication. It's confirmed, they're mobilizing. But that's not all. There's something far more dangerous. The Empire, they're planning to sabotage key human supply lines. Entire sectors are at risk. Jack's hand froze mid-motion, his eyes narrowing. Sabotage. That word hung in the air like a death sentence. The implications were enormous. If the Empire could cripple humanity's supply lines, it could destabilize entire colonies, choke trade routes, and weaken their position in the galaxy. This wasn't just a military strike, it was an economic war. Who's leading this operation? Jack's voice was steady, though a cold fury was beginning to churn in his gut. Grand Admiral Zareth Kor, the voice replied. He's orchestrating the entire thing. It's a multi-phase operation, diverting fleets, covert strikes, and long-term disruption. We're already seeing ships disappearing from the fringe sectors. Jack leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. This was far worse than he had anticipated. Zareth had always played the game in the shadows, but this level of betrayal, this degree of planning, was something else entirely. I need confirmation on every move they're making, Jack said, his voice now sharp with resolve. And get me an emergency meeting with the Confederation Council. The Empire's not just breaking the truce, they're starting a war without firing a shot. The line went dead, and Jack sat in silence for a moment. His mind raced. The Empire's actions were a blatant violation of the peace agreement, but this felt more calculated, more insidious. Zareth had known exactly what he was doing. He wasn't just breaking the truce. He was aiming to cripple humanity before the first shot was even fired. Jack didn't waste any time. Within minutes, he was in the conference hall again, standing at the center of a room full of silent, watchful delegates. They had been waiting for him, their eyes flicking toward him with curiosity, suspicion, and something darker, fear. The tension in the room was palpable, like the calm before a storm. As Jack stepped to the front, he addressed the assembly. "The Empire has lied," he began, his voice cutting through the room with the clarity of truth. "Their fleet is moving, and they are not only preparing to break the truce, they are actively destabilizing our supply chains, targeting our colonies." A murmur rippled through the room. It was the kind of reaction Jack had hoped for, shock and disbelief, quickly replaced by concern. Humanity had worked too hard to get to this point, and the Empire knew it. They weren't just targeting military assets, they were targeting everything humanity depended on. He could feel Zaratha's gaze on him, icy and unmoving. The Grand Admiral had made no move to stop Jack from speaking, but his cold silence spoke volumes. "I have proof," Jack continued, looking directly at Zarath. "I've seen the communications. This isn't an isolated incident. This is a well-coordinated effort to sabotage us." Zaratha's lips twitched, but he said nothing. "Admiral," Jack pressed, "do you deny these actions? Do you deny that your fleet is being used for covert strikes against our most vital sectors?" Finally Zarath spoke, his voice as smooth as ever. "I do not deny that ships are moving," he said, his tone controlled, almost bored. "But as you know, Ambassador, military operations can often be misinterpreted. Perhaps your intelligence is incomplete." Jack clenched his fists, but his expression remained calm. "You've already proven your intent, Admiral. The evidence is clear. And you may have the power to move your fleets, but you will not have peace." The room fell into silence. Zaratha's gaze hardened, but he held his position. This was more than a negotiation now. It was a standoff. Jack stepped away from the podium, signaling Faye, who was standing by the door. As the meeting continued around him, Jack ducked into a private side room. The gravity of the situation was sinking in. The peace talks were no longer just about diplomacy. They were about survival. "You were right," Jack said quietly to Faye, his voice low. "The Empire's not just breaking the truce, they're planning something far worse." Faye, usually calm, looked at him with a mixture of concern and urgency. "What's our next move?" "We don't have much time." Jack's fingers drummed nervously against the table as he thought. "We need to act fast. We can't risk giving them any more leeway. But we also can't make this an open war, not yet. We need to send a message that we won't back down, but we have to do it strategically." He glanced over at the communication console, where reports were still pouring in. "We need to go public with this. If we expose Zaratha's plan, we might force him to back off. At the very least, we'll have the galaxy watching." "But will that be enough?" Faye asked, her brow furrowed. "If Zarath doesn't back down, we're looking at an all-out war. We're not ready." Jack took a deep breath. He wasn't ready, and neither was the Confederation. But humanity couldn't afford to be passive any longer. The Empire had shown its hand, and it was time to show the galaxy that humans could play this game too. "We'll send the evidence to every major faction in the galaxy. It's time they knew what the Empire is really up to." Later, in the midst of a flurry of activity, Jack stood on the balcony overlooking the peaceful expanse of Vanta Prime. For a moment, the serenity of the planet was almost mocking, as if nature itself was unaware of the storm brewing above. The war was coming, whether he was ready or not. But Jack had never been one to shrink from a fight. The fate of humanity was at stake, and he wasn't about to let Zarath, or anyone else, erase everything they had worked for. As he turned to leave the balcony, the familiar hum of his communicator buzzed. It was time. The message was ready to be sent. And Jack Harrison was about to remind the galaxy that humanity wasn't as powerless as the Empire thought. In the dimly lit room, Jack's finger hovered over the send button. The message was simple, clear, and damning. "The Empire has violated the truce. The sabotage begins now." He pressed the button. The transmission was out. The galaxy would know the truth. The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic decision-making and tense communications. Jack Harrison sat in a war room, surrounded by the flickering screens of strategists, analysts, and military officers from the Confederation. His eyes darted between them, processing the flood of information as it came in. The Empire's fleet was still moving, its destination unclear, but the signs were unmistakable. The sabotage had already begun. "Sir?" a lieutenant called from the far side of the room. "The first supply line is down. Communication with Sector 7 has been severed. We've lost contact with several convoys heading to the outer colonies. It's as if they've been targeted in waves." Jack's jaw tightened. This wasn't random. Zareth was pulling strings, orchestrating a series of calculated strikes designed to cripple human infrastructure without a single shot being fired. "Get every available asset in play," Jack ordered, his voice cool and controlled despite the turmoil beneath the surface. "We're not letting them destabilize our colonies. Faye, get me a direct line to Commander Rook. I want every fleet in orbit ready for rapid deployment." Faye moved quickly to relay the orders. Jack leaned back in his chair, rubbing the back of his neck. This wasn't just a military threat, it was an existential one. If the Empire succeeded in its plan, the Confederation could be set back years, perhaps decades, in its growth and expansion. A voice cut through his thoughts, pulling him back to the immediate task at hand. "Sir, we've also confirmed that they've locked down key systems in the neutral zone. Every sector from here to the fringes is effectively under Empire control." It was Lieutenant Marlowe, a young officer with sharp instincts. "They're preparing for something much larger than we anticipated." Jack's fingers tapped lightly against the console. "They're not just trying to cripple us, they're setting up a blockade. A stranglehold. If we can't break it, we'll be boxed in. And then, they'll come for the core systems." He looked up, meeting Faye's eyes. "Prepare a message for the Confederation Council. Tell them to mobilize reserves. The Empire's not just testing our resolve, they're preparing for full-scale war." The minutes dragged by, each one heavier than the last. Jack moved quickly through the halls of the command center, every step weighed down by the realization that he was in a race against time. The Empire was already in motion, their fleet scattered across the system, disrupting communication and attacking key human assets. There were still a few moves ahead. As Jack reached the central briefing room, his communication console buzzed. It was Commander Rook. "Sir, I've got a visual on the Empire's movements." Rook's voice came through clearly, but the tension was unmistakable. "They're not stopping at the neutral zone. We've just intercepted a transmission. They've already sent covert teams into our key colonies. The sabotage is spreading faster than we anticipated." "How soon until we can counter?" Jack asked, his tone steady despite the urgency gnawing at him. "We've got fleets en route, but it's going to take at least 3 hours to position them. By then, they could have already crippled half of our main trading routes." Jack's mind raced. 3 hours. They had 3 hours before the damage was irreversible. "How far out are our nearest ships?" he asked quickly. 15 minutes, Rook replied. "But they'll need to scan the area, confirm the location of Empire forces. We can't risk flying blind." Jack was silent for a moment, weighing the options. Then, a thought struck him. "Get me a direct line to Admiral Roke," he ordered. "We need someone in the neutral zone, right on the Empire's tail. If we hit them now, we might be able to throw their plans off balance." Admiral Roke was known for his unorthodox methods, tactical genius mixed with an uncanny ability to read a battlefield. Jack trusted him completely. The line went live, and Roke's voice came through, calm and assured. "Jack, I was just briefed on the situation. It's worse than we thought, isn't it?" "You could say that," Jack replied, his expression hardening. "Zareth is playing a game we can't afford to lose. We need to hit him hard, before he can complete his blockade." "I agree," Roke said immediately. "I've already repositioned our ships. We'll move into the neutral zone and force them to reveal their hand. If they're setting up a blockade, we'll find it. Be quick. Every minute counts," Jack urged. "Understood." The next half hour was filled with rapid-fire decisions. Jack paced the war room, watching as the fleets aligned and the strategies unfolded on the holographic display. Each move they made felt like an all-or-nothing gamble. Jack had no illusions about the stakes. If they failed now, the Empire would win without firing a shot. Fleet's moving in, Marlowe reported. They'll be in the neutral zone in less than 10 minutes. Jack nodded. Good. Prepare all communication channels. We need to alert the Confederation and all Allied forces. This is where we make our stand. The moment arrived. The sensors buzzed with activity as Roke's fleet approached the neutral zone. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the hologram flicker to life. The Empire's forces had deployed in a ring, surrounding the vital shipping lanes. But Roke's ships, sleek, fast, and armed with the latest technology, had positioned themselves in perfect alignment to break through the blockade. Let's make this quick, Jack muttered under his breath. Get ready to transmit our findings. If the Empire thinks they can control this galaxy by manipulating trade routes, they're about to find out how wrong they are. The battle that followed was quick but brutal. Empire's ships, massive and heavily armed, fired first, their weapons lighting up the cold vacuum of space. But Roke's fleet was faster, more agile. They dodged, counterattacked, and with ruthless precision, shattered the Empire's hold over the neutral zone. Jack watched the battle unfold, the tension gnawing at him as reports came in. It wasn't over yet, but the momentum had shifted. The Empire had underestimated humanity's resolve, and now they were paying for it. We've got them on the run. Rogue's voice came through, a note of satisfaction in his tone. The blockade's broken. We've taken down their advanced communication systems. They're scrambling. Jack allowed himself a brief moment of relief, but it was fleeting. This victory was just one battle in a much larger war. Good, Jack said, his voice colder now. But this isn't over. We've exposed their plans, but we still need to make sure the galaxy knows what Zareth has done. If the Empire is allowed to recover from this, there will be no peace. He looked out of the window, toward the stars. The galaxy was vast, and the war was far from over. But for the first time in a long while, Jack Harrison felt the weight of hope. Humanity was no longer the underdog. They had a chance to win this war. And they would fight with everything they had. The aftermath of the battle had left the neutral zone eerily still. The Empire's blockade was shattered, but not without cost. Roke's fleet had sustained damage. Several ships limped back to the command station, their hulls scarred by Empire laser fire. Jack watched as their coordinates flashed on his console. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Sir? A voice called from behind him. We've cleared the debris field, but we've got a problem. Jack turned sharply, his mind already shifting to the next set of concerns. The problem was always the same with the Empire. It wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about securing the long game. He glanced at the screen, and the data streaming in confirmed his worst fear. Sabotage teams have activated the failsafes on the central relay, Lieutenant Marlowe reported, her voice strained. We've lost communication with the outer colonies. We're blind to their movements. If the Empire's still operating in the shadows, we've just handed them the perfect cover. Jack cursed under his breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. It had been the perfect victory, breaking the blockade, pushing the Empire back, but now they were vulnerable again. This wasn't over. He exhaled sharply. We need to get those relays back online, or we'll be back to square one. Faye, get me a direct line to Roke. Now. Minutes later, Jack stood in front of the war room's holodisplay, his eyes narrowing as Roke's face appeared on the screen. The Admiral's features were drawn, his usual calm demeanor strained by the pressure of the situation. Roke, what's the status? Jack asked, his voice measured but tense. We're patching up what we can, Roke replied. We've already lost contact with several convoy ships. If the sabotage teams are still in play, it's possible they've already infiltrated some of the colonies. We're securing what we can, but we need to move quickly. Jack's hand gripped the edge of the console, knuckles white. So we're blind. And the Empire is free to act with impunity. Not exactly, Roke said, his tone shifting slightly. We've got a few moves left. But we'll need to coordinate quickly. They may have disrupted our lines, but they can't shut down everything. We've still got a few surprises up our sleeves. Jack raised an eyebrow. What kind of surprises? We've got one last fleet standing by in the outer rim, Rogue continued. They've been under the radar, undetected by the Empire. If we can get them into position, we might be able to push the Empire back far enough to regain control of the relay stations. But it's risky. We'll be outgunned. Jack exhaled sharply. But it's our only option, right? Rogue didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. Jack could hear the underlying truth in the silence. Prepare the fleet, Jack said, his voice hardening with resolve. We don't have much time. Back in the command center, Jack watched as the fleets prepared for the next phase. His heart beat in time with the countdown ticking away on the holodisplay. They were going to move fast, strike hard, and, if they were lucky, get the relay back before the Empire could do irreparable damage. Faye moved swiftly to his side, a fresh report in her hand. We've confirmed that several sabotage teams are already in the core sectors. We're going to need to move our reinforcements in from every direction. Make it happen, Jack ordered. Send everything we've got. But we need to move with purpose. If we scatter our forces too thin, we'll be vulnerable to counterattack. Understood, Faye replied, already moving to implement the orders. Jack couldn't help but feel the gravity of the situation pressing down on him. Each move felt like it could be his last. One misstep, and the Empire would slip through their fingers like sand. The stakes had never been higher. Humanity's very survival hung in the balance, and he was their last hope. The battle for the relay stations was brutal. Rogue's fleet surged into the neutral zone, their ships slicing through the remaining remnants of the Empire's forces with precision and deadly accuracy. Jack's eyes remained fixed on the holographic battlefield as the Empire's defensive grid collapsed. But this was no time for celebration. The sabotage teams were still out there, lurking in the shadows, ready to strike at the heart of humanity's fragile infrastructure. Command, we're approaching the relay, a voice crackled through Jack's comms. But there's a problem. The Empire's scrambling their forces. We're taking fire from their hidden positions. Push through it, Jack growled, tightening his grip on the armrest of his chair. We can't afford to lose this position. Hold steady. All fleets converge on the relay. Yes, sir, came the reply, but the voice sounded strained. The pressure of the situation was mounting on all sides. Jack's eyes flicked to the holomap, tracking the movements of the enemy fleet. They were closing in on the relay stations, and with every passing second, the risk grew that they would fail. Sweat beaded on Jack's brow as he watched Rogue's ships press forward, the battle growing ever more chaotic. But there was no room for hesitation. We need to break their lines, Jack ordered, his voice steely. Rogue, can you push your forces through the gap? Rogue's voice crackled back through the comms, low and steady. We've got enough momentum to break through. But we'll need cover. Can you coordinate with the nearby fleets? We'll need support. Jack glanced at Faye, who was already preparing the communications channels. Get the support fleets in position. We're not losing the relay now. The moment of truth arrived. Rogue's fleet, under heavy fire, broke through the Empire's defenses with a brutal push, their ships firing in rapid succession. Jack's pulse quickened as the hologram displayed the collapse of the Empire's outer defense grid. The relay stations were within reach. All fleets, prepare for relay recapture, Jack ordered, his voice hard with determination. This is the turning point. Push through, and make them regret underestimating us. The final charge was swift. The Empire's forces, disoriented and scattered, failed to regroup in time. Rogue's ships stormed the relay stations, cutting down the remaining resistance. As the final station flickered back to life, Jack's heart skipped a beat. The relay was secure. Status report, Jack barked, still processing the magnitude of the victory. We've regained control of the relay stations, Faye replied, her voice laced with relief. We've also cut off their communication channels. The Empire's blind. Jack allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. We've turned the tide. Now, let's make sure they never forget what happens when they underestimate humanity. He looked out at the stars, knowing this victory was just the beginning. The Empire had underestimated them before. Now, they would see what humanity could truly do,